What is up, everyone? My name is Joseph, and today I want to talk about the Theater of Blood dev blog that was posted earlier today at the time of recording this. I don't normally do a dev blog overview, or I don't normally talk about poll questions in an actual video, but I wanted to do it with this one because I have a lot of opinions and comments on some of the poll questions presented, and I kind of wanted to just go down and give my thoughts on how these different things might affect the game and give my stance on it. If you do want to just skip around or hear my opinions on just part of the dev blog, I'll leave the timestamps on screen for the different categories of items presented, and you can skip around that way. Now, there is something that I think relates to this dev blog, but I'm not going to talk about, and that's really power creep and how power creep affects this game. And if you'd like to hear me talk about that, I'm going to leave a YouTube poll in the upper right-hand corner of this video. So go ahead and click on that and vote either yes or no if you want to hear me talk about that. And in general, if you want to hear my thoughts and opinions on different parts of this game, be sure to follow my Twitch stream. I'll leave a link in the description. I get on these rants all the time, and if you're looking for a more casual way of hearing my opinions, go ahead and follow that. I stream 2 to 3 times a week if that's something that interests you. But now let's just get into my thoughts on the dev blog for the Theater of Blood. So the first thing I want to talk about really quickly is just the general mechanics of how the raid will work. And I want to start off by talking about the death mechanics. The death mechanics for Raids 2 is very unique, and it's not really done in any other old school RuneScape encounter. And what it is that if you die, you actually get put in this temporary death state where you can't really do anything except for watch. And the only time an encounter resets is if your entire team dies. And this is what's called a wipe. And if this happens, the entire raid resets, and you have to start back from the beginning. And while this is new to old school RuneScape, this is a very familiar type of death mechanic system compared to other MMOs and other raid systems from other games. So I'm in favor of this. I think it brings a familiar feel compared to other games, and I think it fits the sense of raids better, where you can't just die and then come right back into the fight. You have to wait to see if your team can complete that encounter. So piggybacking off of that, let's talk a little bit about the party size. So the party size for this raids will be between 3 and 5 people, capping out at 5. You cannot have any more than 5 players. You can go in just solo or with 2 people, but from what it sounded like when they talked about it in the Q&A earlier today, you're probably not going to be able to complete some of the rooms, or you just won't be able to finish it doing that. You might be able to squeeze by, but it's going to be much more difficult and it won't be efficient. And the last thing I want to touch on is just the drop system. So the drop system is pretty similar to Raids 1. After each boss, you'll get a small drop just to compensate your time, basically, which won't be supplies, as you won't be able to skill in this encounter. You won't be able to get supplies back. You will have to go in with the supplies and only use those supplies, but you will get some drops to compensate your time. But you'll get the main drop and the only chance at uniques after killing the final boss, and only after killing the final boss. They haven't released specifics on how the drop system will work or how the point system will work, but they have said that the more times you die, the less chance you'll have at a unique item at the end. So in general, you're just not going to want to die. But that's kind of a general overview of how raids will work from what they've released so far, and I'm very in favor of how they plan to do this. I think it'll be different for old school RuneScape and a little bit unique in the game, and I think it'll be a nice change of pace, and I think it will be a fun encounter. But now let's get into some of the proposed rewards and my opinions on how they'll affect the game, and if they'll be good or bad, and what I'll be voting on those poll questions. So the first thing I want to talk about are the new potions that have been proposed. And I'm going to kind of just go down the list here. So if you have the dev blog open, you can go and follow along. If not, I'll probably leave the questions on screen so you can read them there. But the first 2 things I want to talk about are the Bastion potion and the Battle Mage potion, since I think these are kind of similar. The Bastion potion will be a combination of the Range potion and a Super Defense potion, and the Battle Mage potion will be a combination of the Magic potion and a Super Defense potion. And they have, if you want to know the specifics on how they're made, it's listed in the dev blog, but that's what their effects will be. Now, for both of these questions, I will be voting yes, and the main reason is I don't think it really is overpowered, but I think it fits a nice niche. And I think that the price will reflect that. So I think they're going to be more expensive than both the magic and range potion. And I don't think they're going to be useful in every single situation that you would need a ranging potion. But I think having just that little bit of an upgrade for a little bit increase in cost is a nice place to put this potion. Again, it's not going to be overpowered and it's not going to be dead content, I don't think, because I can think of many situations where this would be useful, but I don't think it's going to be a required item. Like if you bring a range potion, you're not going to just always upgrade to these, similar to how you always don't upgrade to a Sandfew Serum over a Super Restore or a Prayer Potion. It's going to depend on your situation, and I like the flexibility of being able to get a few extra stats for a little bit more money based on the encounter you're doing. So I don't think this item necessarily breaks any part of the game. I don't think it makes it super easy, but I also do think they'll have their use. So I am in favor of these. I think they're good propositions, and I think they fit the style of potions pretty well. And that style being set by really the prayer, super restore, Sandfew kind of combination or progression. And then you also have the attack, super attack, and combat potion progression. So I think it fits that progression well, and I think there's situations where they will be useful. The next potion proposed is the Totality potion, and the effect of this is the combination of a super combat potion, a ranging potion, and a magic potion. Now, I will be voting yes on this, probably. It's really hard to say, but I do have some reasonings, and I'll explain that. So I think this potion needs to be very expensive for it to come into the game, but I'm not entirely convinced that its niche areas will allow it to be, if that makes sense. If this potion is quote-unquote affordable in the way that prayer potions are affordable compared to Sandfew Serums, or a superset is affordable compared to a super combat, it will give every player an additional inventory slot when doing things that require multi-way combat. So if you're doing the Inferno, the Gargoyle boss, DKs, Vorkath Sire, there's a lot of situations where you're using multiple combat styles. And if this potion is very affordable, it will allow everyone doing those encounters to just have a free inventory slot. And I don't think that's a good thing. However, if this the price of this item is closer to the price of something like the Sandfew Serum or the combat potion when compared to a superset, the common player will probably choose the cheaper option and sacrifice that extra inventory slot in order to go for the cheaper option. And those trying to push more kills per hour and trying to maximize efficiency will opt for the more expensive potion. And I think that situation is a good one. But again, that will greatly depend on what the price of this potion ends up being. And the state of the RuneScape economy is very fickle and very hard to predict in general. So it's hard to say where this is going to lie, but I do lean on the side of this being a more expensive potion just based on the components of it and based on how expensive a super combat potion is compared to a superset. So I think it will fit a nice situation in the same way that a Sandfew Serum fits a nice situation compared to the Super Restore. And I will be voting yes for this because I don't think it's going to be super overpowered, and I don't think it will be commonplace. I think it will be a thing that richer players use to gain that extra inventory slot, but I don't think it's going to be a thing that the common or the average player, or maybe the little bit of a budget player, will use. And I think that's a good position for this potion to be in. Again, that completely depends on its price, but I do see the price of this being a little bit higher just based on its effect and based on the components of it. So I will be voting yes to that potion. The next potion that they've listed here is the Vigor potion. The Vigor potion restores prayer, which the rate of it is the same of a prayer potion, and gives the stamina potion effect for a limited time, and that time is 1 minute compared to the 2 minutes that the stamina potion gives. And to note that this does not give the energy, it just gives the effect of the stamina potion. So I will be voting yes to this. I do think it's a really niche item. I think it's going to have relatively few situations where it's going to be a strictly useful item, such as Sarah. I think it will be a good item to use supplementary to your super restores and your regular stamina potions. But I do think it will have a few uses, and I do think it will be an interesting item overall. And where I think this item will really shine is when you're learning an encounter. So for example, the Inferno. There's situations when you're learning the Inferno and you're new to it, and if you're like me, you're not good at it, where you want that extra energy because the bats just drain your energy and you use a lot of prayer and you don't like walking. So for the first few attempts, you take a few of these. You not only can you restore prayer, but you can not restore energy, but you can stop yourself from using as much energy when you run. So if you finish a wave with only 5 energy, that energy is going to last you a little bit longer than if you didn't have that stamina effect. So I do think that this potion will have some niche situations, and I think it will be an interesting item overall, but I do think that there's very few locations or very few activities that this will be very useful for, which again, I think is a good spot for a potion. It's a potion that has some uses. The price will justify its extra effects, and it's not going to be overpowered. And that's my main thing with these proposed items and potions and everything. It's not going to be overpowered, and it's going to fit a specific niche. And I think this item does that, so I will be voting yes for this. Now, the last potion that they've proposed here is the Super Prayer Potion. Now, this item restores prayer, again, equal to a prayer potion, and restores 1 prayer point every 5 seconds for 30 seconds, which is 6 prayer points total over extra prayer points over the course of that time. Now, I will be voting yes for this, and I'll explain why, because I've actually gone back and forth on this over the between when I read it and now. Originally, like I said, this sounded really, really good. And it is really good, but I don't think it's too good. And I think this because I don't think it's going to be the type of item that you only bring. Like, you're not only going to bring super prayer potions. You'll probably bring 1 or 2 for a full trip of whatever you're doing. And the reason for that is if you aren't prayer flicking, and this will be really useful or only useful if you're not prayer flicking. So if you're actually using prayer points and you're doing it at a high-end boss, a high-level PVM encounter, you're going to be losing prayer points at a rate that's more than 6 for 30 seconds. So you're not going to want to use this as just a normal prayer restoration. So you're going to want to bring other prayer restoration potions. So Super Restore, a prayer potion, a Sanfusium. And this will just be used to supplement those. So really where it shines is that mid to high level tier. So before you get to the super efficient prayer flick everything phase, but after you're at the mid-level phase. So there'll be a spot in the middle where I think this will shine. And I think because of what I think the price will be, I think it'll be a little bit more expensive, higher than a super restore, based on my speculation. That could be super wrong. But I think the price will mean that you're not going to take it to low-end PVM. You're really only going to take it to that high-end PVM. And the people who are going to find it most useful are the people who camp prayers instead of prayer flicking at all. So I do think it will have a use, but again, it's not as overpowered as I originally thought, because again, it is only 6 more prayer points than a prayer potion, and I think that that's a good spot for it. If it was any more, if it was a super restore plus those 6, I think then we're getting a little bit too dicey. But I mean, 6 prayer points over 30 seconds per dose, I don't think is overpowered, especially since you'll only be bringing probably a few of these per trip based on whatever activity you're doing. So I do think it fits a specific spot, and overall, that is the last potion, and I think all of these potions fit a good spot. I think they all have a very good niche that they fit into, and I think they'll do their job well without being stupidly overpowered. Now, I do think the Totality Potion does have a chance to be a little bit too good, and by just giving you an extra inventory slot and an extra few inventory slots over, the superset, the base components. But I think that the price will justify its spot. Similar to how the Super Combat Potion is justified now that we're looking back at it. Yeah, you save an inventory slot or 2, but the price justifies saving that inventory slot. I think the Totality Potion will fit that same bracket, and I think will even be used a little bit less because you're not going to need the magic portion of it, and you're not going to use the range portion of it or the average player won't, because it will be much more expensive and it will be more cost efficient or cost effective to just use a super combat and a ranging potion. So I think it will see use. I think it does have its uses, but I don't think it's going to be too common to the point where everybody is getting that extra inventory slot, and I think it will fit a good spot. So that is all I really have to say about the potions. Overall, I think they were done really well, designed pretty well, and I think after testing and some fine tuning, I think they will be spot on. So now let's talk about the one prayer scroll that they proposed, and that's the Judgment Prayer Scroll. So the requirement for this is 85 prayer. Again, it drops from the final boss of the raid. And the effect of this is it boosts your melee attack only, so not your strength, just your attack by 10%, but also lowers your own defense by 50%. Now, this is an overhead prayer, so you cannot use another overhead prayer in combination, but you can stack boost prayers. So you can stack piety or whatever other prayer you have, chivalry or rigor for whatever reason. But you can stack those types of prayers, but you cannot stack another overhead. Now, while Judgment is active, 1/6 of the user's prayer will be drained per point of damage dealt. So if you deal a 6, you'll lose 1 prayer point. And what this means is that you will not be able to prayer flick this prayer. Now, before I get into my opinions, I want to say I will be voting yes to this. And this is probably one of the harder things that I would say I decided I'm voting yes to, because I think its uses are very limited, but I think it could be very interesting. So the main use of this is going to be for specking. So when you want to spec, Dragon Warhammer spec something, you're going to want to throw this on to get a little bit of extra accuracy. It also probably will have some use in PvP. When you're trying to get that AGS Gmul spec combination off, you throw this on, higher chance of hitting. Granted, your defense is lower, but if you can do that all in a few ticks, you're really only losing that defense for 1 attack, maybe, depending on what item they're using. But I do think that this prayer has uses. I'll be honest, I don't know the full effects it will have on PvP, but I do think that the trade-off of losing 1/6 of your damage as prayer points, I think that's a pretty good trade-off, even for PvP. So I might not be the utmost expert on PvP, but it sounds pretty balanced to me. So I will be voting yes for this, only because I think it will make some situations interesting. You have that option to spec on a boss in PvM, but you're reducing, your defense as well as turning off your overhead prayer. In PvP, it could make for some more interesting switches. So I do think that it has its place. Again, it was one of my more difficult decisions because it does seem a little bit useless, and I think the price will be a little bit lower than I'd like from a raid reward unique. But I do think it has its uses. I don't think it's broken, and I don't think it's dead content. And those are some of my biggest qualifications for voting on content. And again, the testing of this will tell whether or not it's worth it. But just seeing the text about it, or seeing the blog post about it, makes me think that I will vote yes for this. So that's really the only prayer school they mentioned. So that's all we have for the prayer. So now let's move on to the gear that they have proposed for raids 2. In this section, I will be talking about the 3 pieces of gear proposed, as well as the untradeable cloak. We're going to start off with the Infernal Defender. So the Infernal Defender attaches a tradable hilt that will be the drop from raids to a Dragon Defender, making it an untradeable defender. The requirements for it are 70 attack and 70 defense, and its stats fit the upgrade progression of most defenders. So the upgrade progression from Rune to Dragon is the same from Dragon to Infernal, so it does match up pretty well there. Now, I will be voting yes to this, and the reason is I think it fits that progression well. Now, it's impossible not to have power creep to a point in this game, and I'm not going to get super in-depth on that point, but I do think that the creep that this introduces is a good one. I think the progression is solid, it makes sense, it fits a theme, and it doesn't do anything out of the ordinary. It's not creating something brand new and creating a new BIS item. It is creating a new BIS defender, but it fits the theme, and it doesn't have a huge jump over its predecessor. And I think that's a good thing. And I think that's where in general, I think the progression needs to fit. It makes sense, and it follows a concurrent theme. So I will be voting yes to this for that reason. Now, I've seen a few people mention that it further devalues shields, and I don't really agree with this point. Because I think shields are already devalued enough. Shields are already kind of so niche that I don't think this affects them at all. In the current meta of Old School RuneScape, it's really offense first, defense second, unless you're doing something that requires the defense. And this isn't going to change that. Those situations that require the defense, you're still going to bring a shield, whether it be an Ellie or a crystal shield, whatever it is. You're still going to bring that shield. And for the offensive situations, you're just going to upgrade your Dragon Defender. So I don't think this changes that meta at all. And I don't really think it further devalues shields, because honestly, it's at a point where you only bring defense stuff over offensive stuff if you really need that defense. And this defender is not going to make any difference in that. You're still going to follow the same flow chart. Do you need defense? You don't need defense? Take the best defender you can take. You do need defense. Take whatever shield you can afford, or whatever shield makes sense. And I don't think this is going to change that. So I do think this is I think it's a good item. So I will be voting yes to that. The next item or group of items I want to talk about is the Justicar armor. This is actually really interesting. It's a full set of armor, plate legs, chest, and a helmet. And individually, they have the highest defensive stats of any tank gear. But when worn in combination with each other, when you have all three pieces worn, there's a special effect. And that effect is it's a damage reduction. I'm not going to get into the specific numbers, but it's a damage reduction based on the attack style of the enemy. So if the enemy attacks with Crush, you get damage reduction for the Crush style based on your Crush defense. So if you want a full explanation, again, it's in the dev blog. And I will be voting yes for this because I think it's really interesting and I think it fits good situations and I don't think it overrides anything. And I'll explain that in just a second. I think that in general, independently, they're very good tank items. And I think tank items are something that are somewhat undervalued for high-level PVM. Maybe not undervalued, but just maybe not as good as the offensive bonuses. Like I mentioned before with the shields, you don't bring defense unless you need it. So I think this just gives another option for tank gear, which I think is really cool because it's not used as much. So it'll see a lot of use in beginner PVM where you need that defense. So for example, in Inferno, instead of bringing a BCP, maybe you'll bring the Just a Card chest guard, and it gives you a little bit of an extra defensive bonus if you need it. And I think it will hold its value because I think it will be more expensive than the BCP. So I think it fits a good spot and it fits a good niche, and that niche being early game or beginner PVM and, whatever situation you need tank gear in. But I think the effect is also very good because it's something unique to RuneScape or to old school RuneScape specifically. I like the idea of damage reduction, and I like the idea that it's relatively consistent. So like an Ellie has a chance for randomness, but this will be always. So you'll use this when you need to tank. You'll use the full gear. Situations you would use the whole gear in is if you're duoing or doloing a boss, you have that damage reduction. And I think this gear will definitely hold its price. So I think it will be a good item. I don't think it overrides anything. And yeah, it overrides some Barrow's armor for tanking. I don't think that's a big deal. Barrow's armor has had its place for a while, and I think will still have its place as budget gear, but it's been kind of that top tier except for maybe Bandos. And I think that having this kind of supersede that or be the next tier up, I think is good because it offers no offensive bonuses like Bandos, but it also offers better defensive bonuses. And I think the set bonus in general is pretty interesting. I don't have a problem personally with damage reduction. I think it's an interesting game mechanic. And, obviously anything can be overdone or anything can be blown out of proportion. If they do this too much, yeah, it'd be a bad thing. But as a very unique use or very unique effect, I think it works well. And I think there's enough of a trade-off. You're sacrificing 3 item slots for a little bit of extra damage reduction, and you're sacrificing a lot of offensive bonuses too with not bringing a helmet or something like a BCP. So I do think it's a good item, and I think the effect is a good one. Maybe the numbers might need tweaking. Again, I don't want to get specific on the numbers because these could change after testing when they put it on, whatever test server they're going to put it on. These numbers could change, and I don't want to get specific on the details specifically. That's why I'm not really mentioning item stats or really anything, because these could change. It's really the concepts that I want to talk about and the concepts that I'm really voting on. And I think the numbers will be tweaked to be balanced based on testing, and I trust the JMods to balance them correctly. At least I hope they'll balance them correctly. So I'm voting. I'm really just voting on the concepts, and the concept of this gear I think is really unique, and I think will have a place. And again, I don't think it overpowers anything. I think it fits in well with the old school style, and I think it will have its place. So the next item I want to talk about are the Vampirium Vambraces. The requirements for these are 75 range, 75 defense, and basically it's similar to the crystals from Cerberus. You combine this broken Vambrace with Ranger Gloves, which, if you don't know what those are, they're a reward from Elite Clue Scrolls. They were 2.5 mil and they shot up to 40 mil, so don't try to buy one now, although they've probably dropped again. And real quick, I'm voting no on this. I don't like this for many reasons. First off, I don't think range needs a buff, and I don't think I'm alone with this. Range is probably one of the most overpowered combat styles when you factor in the weapons, blowpipe, twisted bow, and any small amount of DPS increase just is blown out of proportion by the items, the ranged weapons. And I don't think that we need another range buff. And I think that for this raid, I'd be more than happy with just sticking to melee and mage stuff, or just melee stuff. And I don't think range needs a buff. Blowpipe being so affordable, any amount of range DPS increase is just amplified because of because of how the blowpipe works and how good it is. So I don't think we need another buff to range. You know, it's good enough already, and it's good enough to last us a good while. And this is really where I think power creep is bad. When you have something that's so good and then you continue, or you make an item that is so good. And again, I don't want to get too deep into this, but you have the blowpipe that's so good, and then you incrementally buff range at the same rate as other things, but those other combat styles don't have those really overpowered items. Range just gets better and better than the other combat styles. And I think range is already in a good spot to stay for a few years and for a few updates. And I don't think that they need even this small buff. I don't think range needs it. I think sticking with Borrow's Gloves is fine. And in general, I think there's plenty of options for ranged. The second reason I don't like this item is because I don't like the Pegation Crystal. I think that when you have something that combines with something that's so RNG based, like the Ranger Boots and the Pegation Crystal, or like these Van Braces and the Ranger Gloves, based on the rarity of the base item, and the fact that that base item isn't super grindable, like, you know, just killing a boss over and over. You get it from clue scrolls and it's rare from clue scrolls, which means that base item is going to hold its value, meaning these Van Braces wouldn't be worth near as much as they should be worth, because the Ranger Gloves would hold a lot of that value, similar to how the Pegation Crystal holds no value and the Ranger Boots hold all of their value. Now, I don't think it would be as drastic as Pegations and Ranger Boots, because I do think that the difficulty of raids will keep this item at a higher value than the Pegation Crystal, but I don't think it will be enough to justify it. I don't like the situation that Pegation Crystals are in, and I don't like doing it again. Now, I'm okay with something like Primordials or the Eternal Boots to a point, because again, Dragon Boots are super easy to get, and that base item is very cheap. The Infinity Boots are relatively a consistent thing to get. You just have to grind them out. It's not RNG based. But when you have something that's so RNG based off of a clue scroll, I think you're just forcing that new item to not hold the value that it should. And you're going to put a lot of that value on the RNG and the rare item that's from a clue scroll. And I can't emphasize that enough, because I think the clue scroll part of it is so vital. Like, you have a drop of Dragon Boots from a level, 83 Slayer requirement monster, and then you have these Ranger Boots, which is 1 out of 256, I believe, of medium clue scrolls. Like, it doesn't match up. And I don't think just taking these clue scroll rewards and adding to them is the correct way of going. I just don't think it's the right way of doing this. Now, I think there's an argument to be made for taking existing items, adding things to them to make them better items instead of releasing new uniques. And in general, I think that's a pretty decent way of going about it. There's some caveats to that, but I don't think that you should take a base item that is so RNG based and then try to increase those. Now, I know it's a little bit different for range because you have so many ranged items coming from clue scrolls. I just don't think this is the right way of doing it. And I don't think this is a good item based on, again, the buff to range and the fact that it's just going to turn into another version of the Pegation Boots. And I don't think it's needed. But in general, I just want to close out with saying, I don't want you to kind of think that I think the numbers on this specific item is necessarily bad. Like, it gives 2 range strength and 14 range accuracy. Those aren't huge numbers. But my problem with this item is the fact that it's attached to range, and range has weapons like the blowpipe and the twisted bow, which are already in a good spot and already put range in a good spot. So I don't think these items are needed, and I will be voting no. The last gear item I wanted to talk about is the SINHAZA SHROUD, which is a cape that you get after completing the raid, and you can upgrade it by completing a certain number of raids. So, right now they have it, every few hundred, and the last one being at 5,000. They've said they're going to adjust those numbers, so I'm not going to talk about the numbers. But basically, it will be a purely cosmetic cape, untradeable, and it's just to show off your prestige and how many raids you've completed after certain milestones. I'll be voting yes for this because I'm of the opinion that cosmetic items are good as long as they're not over the top. I think the design of this is probably going to fit with old school style, and I'm okay with cosmetic items. I come from a background of games that have, transmog systems where you can make yourself look like any old gear. You can make your current gear look like old gear, and I don't think RuneScape should go that direction necessarily, but I'm okay with cosmetic items that are a little bit just more for prestige and fashionscape. I don't see a problem with that as long as they don't go over the top, and I don't think the design of this cape is going to be over the top. So I will be voting yes for that. But that does wrap up the gear, everything I want to talk about for the gear. And that moves us on to the last section of the weapons that will be released or are proposed to be released with Raids 2. So there are 3 weapons proposed in this update. And the first one I want to talk about is the Rapier, the Grazi Rapier. The requirement for this is 75 attack, and just in general, I will be voting yes for this. Now, the testing might throw me off a little bit, but I think the concept of this item is good, and I will be voting yes for this. And overall, a quick description of this item. It'll be a new best in slot melee item. It has pretty much the same stats of an Abyssal Tentacle. However, it has stab accuracy with a little bit of slash accuracy compared to the Abyssal Tentacle, which has slash accuracy. And it will be a sword, so it will have the ability to go on aggressive style, which gives you an invisible strength bonus, and it's also not degradable. So overall, a new best in slot stab weapon, and will probably be pretty good in a lot of situations. Now, I think at the current time, and I think some people might be split on this, but I think it's a little underpowered because I think the situations that it will be useful, using stab, isn't going to be enough to let this item hold the value I think it deserves. I think a best in slot melee item should hold some very high inherent value. And if you're going to make it a somewhat niche item without any clear benefits in a majority of situations, I just don't think it's going to hold the value that's a best in slot melee weapon coming from the hardest encounter in the game deserves. I mean, I'm not saying it should have the 1 bill price tag of a twisted bow, and I'm not saying it should be as overpowered as a twisted bow, because God help us if we start doing that to every combat style. But I do think it should be a little bit better. Now, again, it will have +1 max hit in some situations, since the invisible aggressive attack style will give you +3 strength bonus. But I don't think that's enough to make it necessarily better or necessarily really good. Now, it will be good because it's better than a whip. And you don't use something like an Abyssal Tentacle during Slayer because it degrades. So you'll be using this instead. But I think the price tag, honestly, I think this price tag will be too much to justify using it for something like Slayer unless you're grinding post-max. And I think it's going to see a lot of use for bossing and a higher end PVM. And I don't think it really has clear advantages over a whip specific, or over an Abyssal Tentacle specifically. And in high end PVM encounters, you're going to use an Abyssal Tentacle. So, you're kind of doing the trade-off here. Yeah, you can use it for Slayer, but by the time most people get enough money to what this item will be worth, you're not going to have a lot of Slayer left. And I don't think this will really be a priority upgrade even for Slayer. Maybe, but I think you're better spending your money in investing in other avenues for Slayer. So I think this will be one of your last upgrades based on the minimal DPS increase it gives. So I would like to see just a little bit of a change on this, even if it's just a little bit accuracy, or personally what I would like to see is a special effect. So not a special attack, because they said they're not going to add a special attack, which is good. I personally am not a huge fan of special attacks, mainly because I do PVM, and special attacks aren't as useful unless it's something like the Dragon Warhammer. So I'm in favor of not having a special attack, but I wouldn't mind it having a special effect. And even if it's something as simple as doing just a little bit of extra damage to vampires, you get it from a vampire-based raid, so it doing a little bit of extra damage inside the raid, so you can grind out raids a little bit easier. I think instantly that would make it a much better item and have it hold its value, because Raids 2 is probably going to be, grinded a lot for money for GP over and over again by a lot of people. So I think giving it a little bit of a boost in that specific encounter will be good. I'm not saying that will necessarily balance because I haven't play tested it. I don't know. I'm not a game dev, just my speculations on it. Or even if it's something like Barrow's gear has, where occasionally it will trigger some special effect, whatever that is. I think something like that, even if it's very minor, will help this item hold a higher value. And I think it deserves to hold a higher value because it's going to be such a prestigious item. It's the best in slot melee weapon from the hardest encounter in the game. It should hold some value. Not as much as the Twisted Bow, because I do think the Twisted Bow has a lot of integrity issues, and I don't want this item to have integrity issues, but I do think it should be a definite increase over current items. Even if it's incredibly minimal, I think it should have a definite increase over the Abyssal Tentacle, since I think the primary of use for this will be in raids and for high level PVM. So I would like to see some type of special effect, but I mean, that's getting super deep into it. In general, I like the idea of a new melee weapon. Again, I think it fits the style of old school pretty well. It's not super overpowered. Even with a special effect, I don't think it'd be super overpowered. So I think it fits a good spot, and I am in favor of it. So that's all I got to say about the rapier. The next one we have is the Scythe of VIGOUR, and the requirements for this is 75 attack and strength. It's a two-handed scythe, so two-handed weapon. Has no special attack, but it can hit up to 3 enemies once in a 1x3 arc in front of the player. Has a similar special attack to the Dragon and Crystal Halberd, where each swing can also hit large creatures up to 3 times in the same attack. Now, the Scythe can only hit a maximum of 3 NPCs and can only hit a maximum of 3 times per swing. The first hit deals 100% damage, the second 50%, the third 25%, and each attack, regardless of which enemy is your primary target, is rolled independently, which I think is a very important thing to note. This is a charged item. It starts at a uncharged version, which has worse stats. You charge it by using a full vial of blood and 300 blood runes, and it becomes a better item. Now, this has an incredibly slow attack speed, and again, is two-handed. So let me just start off by saying, yeah, I'm voting yes for this, but I think it needs tweaks. Again, it's really hard to say without play testing it, but I don't think it's going to hold up and be useful at its current state. That being said, I really like the idea of a AoE melee weapon that isn't stupidly broken and won't be best in slot for training. And I think it matches up pretty well with something like Chinchappas or Bursting. I don't think it should be to that extreme where, if you're going to train range, just use Chinchappas. It's stupidly fast. I don't like that aspect of it, but I like the aspect of melee keeping up to speed with the other combat styles in terms of having an AoE option. And I think if done correctly, this could be a really unique PVM item. For higher level PVM, killing God War's minions in a group. I think it has situations where it could be useful, but only if it's better than certain thing, better than it is now. As it is right now, you have a chance to do a little bit of extra damage on more than one person, which I like the idea of it being random, that you hit multiple targets, and I like the idea of the decreasing damage, and I really like the idea of the independent attack rolls, unlike, I believe, Chinchappas is the same attack roll. I like that, and I think that is what is needed in a melee AoE weapon. However, I don't really like the idea of it being so trash. And again, I'm speculating, but based on the 75 melee strength and the 95 accuracy on Slash, with a 7 attack rate, that's almost twice as slow as a whip. It's not exactly twice as slow, but it's almost twice as slow with lower strength and barely higher accuracy. So you're getting a worse whip, almost a halved whip on your primary target, and you're almost getting a 25% whip on your second target and a 12.5% whip on your third target. And it just doesn't do much. It's not worth it at that point. If it buffed a little bit to where maybe the concurrent damage on the secondary targets is a little bit higher, or if they just buff the main stats a little bit, or honestly, maybe if they made it one tick faster. Again, I don't know. I can't really say. I haven't ran the exact numbers, and I'm not a playtester. They haven't released the tournament worlds yet, but I do think there's flexibility here, and I do see a lot of potential with this item. I like the idea of having a melee AoE option, and that isn't used for training, that is used for specific situations more in PVM. I like that option, and I think it has a lot of potential. But I really don't like seeing this being dead content. And as of right now, I see it being dead content. So that's really all I have to say for that item. I would love to see it. I would love to see it be a decent-ish item, not overpowered, not dead content. Find that middle ground and put it there, honestly. I think it's a really unique item. I think it could be super, super nice, but it's got some issues in its current state, in my opinion, from what I can see. But that's all I got to say about that. We'll be voting yes. And I see a lot of potential. Now, the last thing we have to talk about is I'm not going to even try to pronounce that, the Blood Trident of the Swamp. Basically, it's a new staff that requires 75 magic, has the same exact stats and strength and method of usage, I guess, of the Trident of the Swamp. But instead of the normal charge cost, it costs 4 blood runes per charge. And the special effect of this is you have a 1/8 chance to heal for 50% of the damage you deal on that attack. Real quick off the bat, I'm voting no for this because I think it's a trash item. Personally, I don't see the use of this item. I don't see where it'll be specifically useful. It does less healing than blood spells. It costs twice as much as using Trident of the Swamp, so you're pretty much paying double for the same DPS with minimal healing. And let me emphasize the minimal healing. I guess it deals a little bit more per damage point than Blood Barrage, but the 1/8 takes it way down. So Blood Barrage, don't quote me on this, but I think is like 25% of your damage dealt, and it's AoE. But let's just say single target. 25% of your damage dealt every time you deal damage. This is 50%, 1/8 of the time you deal damage. It's so significantly worse, it's not worth the 928 GP per charge. I just don't see it having very many uses, and I just don't see it being a good item in the game. And I don't see any way of really making this item good without making it just Blood Barrage on regular spellbook. I don't see any way of making this concept not broken or not dead content. Like I personally don't see the middle ground there. If you make it viable, then you basically can cast Blood Barrage while having Auk or having Bones to Peaches. And if you make it trash, it's never going to get used over Blood Barrage. And that middle ground's really hard for me to find on this item. So I will be voting no for this. If they can surprise me and find something super useful for this item, hell yeah, I'd be in favor of it. But I just don't. I don't think it's an interesting item, and I don't think that it has a middle ground. I don't think it has a niche it fits in. I don't think it's either going to be dead or OP, and I don't like that in my items, in my new items coming to the game. So that's all I got to say about that. I'm pretty simplistic, nothing too in depth with that. But that is all I have to say about this dev blog. If you made it this far, you are one of my favorite people in this world. I hope you did enjoy kind of my overview of this. I know it's kind of long. I tried to structure it as much as possible, but I just felt like this blog was so important to the game and has so many implications that I should just give my opinion of it. I mean, if you've watched some of our previous videos, you'd know I'm not a huge fan of the polling system because I think that uneducated voters have the opportunity to do bad things to this game. And, I'm not claiming that I know everything, but I just wanted to give my opinion on it, not to convince you, more just to give my opinion so you can make your own educated decision. Again, maybe I'm wrong about a lot of this stuff, and maybe I'm speculating wrong. I don't have the correct opinion about different things, but the more that people and the more the voters listen to, the more that they can make an educated decision. And that's all I'm really trying to do here, is just give another viewpoint of it from someone in my position in game, and just my experiences with games in general. But that is all I have for this video. I do hope you guys enjoyed it. I had a lot of fun actually recording this, which I'm surprised about. I didn't think I'd be able to make it this long without just breaking down, but I hope you guys did enjoy it. Again, if you do want to see me talk about power creep, I know it relates to this. I didn't want to get too in-depth in it, but if you do want a full video on power creep in this game, let me know. I'll be happy to make that podcast-style video for you. But that is all I have for this video. How many times can I say that in an outro? Probably 3. But I hope you guys enjoyed your time, and I will see you next time.